From brainwashed sleeper agents to a witch coven disguised as a dance studio, these movie remakes are way better than everyone remembers. The original 1968 sci-fi classic Planet of the Apes was more than just an action-packed adventure. Starring Hollywood legend Charlton Heston, it was capped off by one of the greatest twist endings in cinema history, written by the master of surprise twists himself, Rod Serling. A thoughtful and thought-provoking film with unsubtle layers of social commentary, its thrills and spills were punctuated by a powerful anti-war message at a time when fears of nuclear annihilation were very real. Nearly 50 years later, Rupert Wyatt and Matt Reeves would launch a well-received reboot series starring Andy Serkis.
No!
But somewhere in the middle, Planet of the Apes became the subject of a 2001 remake by Tim Burton, and did solid numbers at the box office, but was quickly forgotten. Burton's effort was dragged by critics as poorly produced action schlock with thinly written characters, and felt almost nothing like the original. Though some of the criticism was valid, the film is seen very differently if you can separate it from the Heston original. On its own merits, Burton's version isn't bad at all, it's just a very different movie, foregoing the more cerebral, slow-paced drama for fast-paced, big-budget action. When viewed as a blockbuster extravaganza, one can overlook its flaws and enjoy it much more as a roller coaster adventure with top-notch special effects and impressive action sequences and makeup. One could argue the film may have been better off as an original story, but as it stands, Burton's Planet of the Apes is a sorely underrated remake, largely forgotten by time as a one-off between the original Apes films and the 2010s rebooted franchise. An iconic 80s war movie, the original Red Dawn pitted a group of American fighters against Russian soldiers. Set in a world where the Soviet Union has grown its influence, the film begins with a Russian assault of the United States. But as armies of Soviet soldiers parachute into Colorado, one group of young men and women, led by actor Patrick Swayze, rise up to fight back against their commie invaders. In 2012, fresh off of his Marvel debut in Thor, emerging action hero Chris Hemsworth starred in a long-delayed remake of Red Dawn. The film boasted an equally eyebrow-raising supporting cast that included Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Josh Hutcherson, Adrian Palicki, and Josh Peck. Instead of the Soviets this time around, though, the invaders are Russian-backed North Korean soldiers, and Hemsworth stars as a young Marine who pulls together friends and allies to fight them. Roasted by critics for its lack of depth, many seem to completely miss the point of this remake of Red Dawn. Though the original may offer somewhat better characters, this 2012 version is everything a fan of the genre could want. High-octane action, run-and-gun fight scenes, and a briskly paced, ridiculous war story. As much as die-hard fans of the original will tell you it doesn't compare, if you can remove your rose-colored nostalgia goggles, you'll find the remake is a silly, old-school action movie worth watching. Some remakes become underrated not because the critics whiffed on them, but because they are remakes of long-forgotten films. Such is the case with the 1988 comedy Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, starring Steve Martin and Michael Caine, which received good reviews and did reasonably well at the box office, but rarely makes anyone's list of best remakes.
Pretend to enjoy yourself. Laugh out loud.
The film was rejiggered from the premise of a 1964 film called Bedtime Story. That film starred Marlon Brando and David Niven as womanizers and con artists who set their eyes on the same target, a wealthy heiress played by Shirley Jones. The 80s version, directed by Frank Oz, had Martin and Caine in the same roles. Caine was scamming unsuspecting women out of their fortunes through various high-concept, long-con-type schemes, and was repelled by Martin's crude, lowbrow, common con-man tactics. Taking Martin's character under his wing, the two eventually agree to team up and work on a rich heiress named Janet, played by Glenn Headley. But after some clever twists, the question becomes, who's conning who? The comedic chemistry between Martin and Caine was terrific in this clever 80s comedy. Decades later, it's still remembered as one of Martin's best, even if it rarely gets the recognition it deserves. A spiritual sequel to George Romero's 1968 film Night of the Living Dead, his 78 flick Dawn of the Dead brought zombies back to theaters with a bit more focus on violence and gore. A highly influential film, it set the action within the confines of a shopping mall, with a group of survivors in a zombie apocalypse under siege by the undead. Often copied, few could hold a candle to its sheer audaciousness and social commentary. But more than 25 years later, writer James Gunn and director Zack Snyder took a crack at a straight-on remake. Starring Mekhi Phifer, Ving Rhames, Sarah Polley, Jake Weber, Ty Burrell, and Matt Frewer, it was faithful to the original in terms of its overall plot progression, but with solid action and over-the-top amounts of gore that displayed the talents of Gunn and Snyder just before they broke through to become superhero auteurs. It took the premise to new places, although it can be argued that it lacked the deeper meaning that made Romero's original so substantive. Nevertheless, those looking for all-out zombie action got exactly what they were looking for, and Snyder has never made any apologies for his focus on spectacle. Unfairly held up against Romero's masterpiece, the 2004 version of Dawn of the Dead was largely unloved upon its release, but over time has earned a following. Today, it's seen as one of Snyder's best films, with Bloody Disgusting going as far as to call it one of the greatest horror remakes ever. If you're simply looking for big-budget action and state-of-the-art special effects, there's a great Joel Kinnaman, Gary Oldman, and Michael Keaton film from 2014 perfect for you. Unfortunately, it was titled RoboCop, so nobody wanted anything to do with it. Criticized for missing the point of the 1987 classic, this is one remake that seriously suffers from unjust comparisons. The original film was directed by Paul Verhoeven, starred Peter Weller, and examined a nihilistic, cold, near future where private enterprise had taken over law enforcement, employing over-the-top gore, language, and violence. The remake had, well, practically none of that. But what it kept was the always cool image of a robot cop. And who wouldn't want that?
I'd buy that for $1.
While the original had its tongue firmly planted in its cheek, with razor-sharp political satire and gut-bursting violence, the remake took a different route. The crux of the story remains the same, with Detroit cop Alex Murphy mortally wounded and resurrected as a robot cop. But it has an entirely different tone and largely drops the original's lust for graphic violence. Instead, the plot serves as more incisive commentary on drone warfare, in a more serious take on the premise. Unfortunately, the remake didn't land with audiences or critics. Script leaks and costume dissection killed the film before it even hit theaters, and inevitable comparisons with the original finished the job. But 2014's RoboCop does what a remake should, taking a time-tested idea and trying to do something new and different with it. In this case, the remake uses sci-fi to offer a takedown of modern military politics, and it works better than most were willing to give it credit. One of Hollywood's seminal political thrillers, John Frankenheimer's 1962 drama The Manchurian Candidate defined the genre. With tensions between the United States and Russia at their highest, the film landed in theaters smack dab in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, making it all the more timely and topical. In the film, a politically connected war veteran is unknowingly brainwashed into carrying out an assassination of a key figure in an upcoming presidential election. Shortly afterwards, the assassination of John F. Kennedy would make the film feel even more prophetic. Some may have felt that the timeliness of The Manchurian Candidate made it an unlikely choice for a remake, but it was remade in 2004 by director Jonathan Demme. This time, starring Denzel Washington, the remake was released during a period of similar unrest and heightened paranoia in the United States following the events of 9/11. In this new version, we meet Gulf War veteran Bennett Marco, whose fellow soldier Raymond Shaw is now running for vice president. But recent nightmares and an odd implant found under his skin reveal a sinister conspiracy that may be hiding a horrifying truth. Bringing the story up to date for the 21st century, the 2004 version of The Manchurian Candidate brings a new angle that helps it stand out while still living up to the ideals of the original. Though well-reviewed, it is rarely discussed among great modern remakes. But with political tensions on the rise at home and abroad, perhaps the time has come to yet again remake one of the best thrillers of the 1960s. How do you remake one of the greatest, most iconic westerns of all time? Well, John Sturgis's The Magnificent Seven was in fact a retelling of the Akira Kurosawa film Seven Samurai that moved the action from Japan to the Wild West. So perhaps people shouldn't be so skeptical. Then again, Sturgis's Magnificent Seven is a classic for a reason. It presented Yul Brynner at his best and made stars out of Steve McQueen, Robert Vaughn, Charles Bronson, and James Coburn. But Antoine Fuqua's remake was less about its direction and genre-defying innovation, but instead it boasted a diverse, dynamic cast and some solid suspense, telling the story of a drifter and gunslinger hired by the people of a small town to help defend against a marauding villain, and bringing in 6 more outlaws to help him with the cause. The plots of both the original and the remake are fairly similar, but smartly choosing not to emulate the style and tone of the Sturges classic, the remake goes for a Western thriller vibe. Some key changes to the story made it more of a tense character drama with a focus on the hero's personal scores and tragic backstories. Co-starring Ethan Hawke, Peter Sarsgaard, Vincent D'Onofrio, and Chris Pratt, the talent in front of and behind the camera is undeniable. And coupled with The Manchurian Candidate and The Taking of Pelham 123, clearly Denzel doesn't shy away from lending his talents to challenging remakes. The newer Magnificent Seven delivers the goods in very different ways than the original, and taken together, they would make an excellent double feature.
Alright, let's do it.
A cult classic of supernatural horror, 1977's Suspiria was directed by Italian filmmaker Dario Argento and was famous for its striking visuals and overwhelming synth score. More about its look and feel than its story, it followed a young student arriving at an elite dance academy run by a coven of otherworldly witches. In the midst of a power struggle, the witches are working to resurrect an ancient evil known as Mother Suspiriorum. The story plays out as a suspenseful mystery as murders pile up to reveal supernatural secrets. The 2018 remake, starring Tilda Swinton and Dakota Johnson, is nearly the polar opposite, though it retells the story practically beat for beat. Instead of a mystery, the audience now knows the school's secret right off the bat. But watch as its newest student is recruited into their blood cult. While the original was a strikingly colorful extravaganza, the remake is a beautifully shot but otherwise more grounded, gritty film focused more on character than shock value. With a strange, disquieting tone that escalates as the film progresses, reviews of 2018's Suspiria were decidedly mixed, with some critics describing it as shocking and others bold and daring. Though divisive, the remake is an unmissable movie for anyone who loves the art of film. Be warned, however, as it's not for the faint of heart.